Alright, today I'll be talking about Breast and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami, translated by David Boyd. And I confess I'm a bit tired right now, but there's not going to be a good time to talk about this given some of my personal circumstances, so it's easier for me to talk about this now while I still remember certain things. So this is going to be maybe a little bit... the format, I'm still going to try to keep it mostly the same as my regular reviews, but it might be a bit more all over the place on this one because I have a bit of a history with this book in the sense that the first time I read it, I really, really loved it, and my opinion kind of falls in line with a lot of the quotes that you'll see around the book and on the book. And then the second time I read it, I absolutely kind of came away almost hating it, given how extreme I felt some of the opinions expressed in it were. And the third time through, so this is my third time actually reading it, and the reason I wanted to come back to it was to see, that time that I read it, I wasn't in the best place in my life, and certain things had happened around me that made me want to see, is the book really as sort of pro-feminist anti-men as I thought it was? If you go back to my previous MP video and look at the end, I said, basically it was kind of like a fuck men, fuck dads, single woman, single mother rule type thing was how I felt at the time. Or, was I being too influenced by outside circumstances? And certainly that is the case. Reading it through this time, I find I'm somewhere in between my two readings. I think that the book does a lot of things that I respect and understand now in a way, keeping a sort of fairly open mind towards all things that, that then I gave it credit for. And I think it's easy to get kind of down that track of narrow-minded sort of echo chamber thinking that you see on the internet a lot, and to take that from this book. But I think that Mieko Kawakami as a writer is doing something more in that than that, and is also as an individual trying to be more than that, to the point where there's a New York, I think it's the New Yorker, actually I think it's the New York Times, I don't know, one of them had a meeting with her where her editor, or her translator, David Boyd, said that she'd be fucking pissed if all she's remembered as is a feminist. And she herself said that she views herself as more of a humanist. So I don't even think that, even though her work is feminist in the sense that it tends to be focused on women and women's issues, it's not necessarily anti-male, nor really, if you read the book on its own merits, does it, come across that way. So that was why I picked it. So to go into, I picked it to, I guess I should just say, TLDR, to reaffirm my own beliefs, or to sort of interrogate an interpretation that didn't seem to quite gel with my other feelings. So in terms of plot summary, it's sort of difficult because what you've got here isn't one long novel so much as you have a novella and then a short novel attached to it. So in terms of the novella, you have Natsuko, who's the main character, lives in Tokyo, and she is an aspiring writer but who hasn't written anything, and she's very poor, has lived her whole life poor. And her sister Makiko comes to visit from Osaka. They're originally from Osaka. Natsuko moved to Tokyo, I believe it was shortly after she graduated college. And Makiko has a daughter, and she's divorced from their husband, and the daughter is about 12 years old, just starting to go through puberty, and has a lot of questions about her body. And they are coming out to visit because Makiko is considering getting breast implants. And Midoriko is currently not speaking to Makiko, her mother, or even Natsuko, she's using a notebook, and this little novella is about their sort of 2.5 day stay in Tokyo. And then the novel itself picks up 8 years later is the timeline, and follows. At this point, Natsuko has published and gotten lucky insofar as her novel was mentioned by a few famous celebrities, but she's struggling with the follow-up, and where the first story kind of focuses on Natsuko's past as a poor, growing up without money, and it's really focused more on Makiko and Midoriko than it is Natsuko, whereas the novel part of it is focused definitely 100% on Natsuko, and Makiko and Midoriko are kind of background characters to the drama that plays out there. And it's about how Natsuko decides that she wants to have a child, but for various reasons has always kind of struggled with that idea, and she's not looking for a relationship, she's not looking for sex, but it's about the difficulty and the weight of responsibility that comes with artificial insemination, and also the children that are born as a result of that, and some of their feelings as well, which is really nice to see brought into it. So in terms of would I recommend this book, yes, and I kind of want to change the format a little bit from would I recommend this book to whom would I recommend this book to, and the answer is there isn't really anyone that I wouldn't recommend this book to, because even if you're not really huge on the sort of feminist angle of it, you're not really into that sort of feminist side of things, there's so much information on what you have to go through in order to have artificial insemination in Japan, and even just some of the stuff from the children of these artificial inseminated individuals, that even if that other stuff is a complete turnoff to you, I think that there's still something in there in that sense. And I also think that, it's just well written, and if you can separate it from, you can't separate everything from current politics, but if you can separate it from the current way that political discourse is often conducted, I think you will find a sort of fairly level-headed approach to it, because sort of one of my problems the first time I read it was that I assumed that the book doesn't really show a lot of normal relationships, and I sort of took that my first time reading it to be kind of anti-men, to be kind of having the suggestion that a relationship between a woman and a man is, not necessarily the best thing. But really what it is it's more the book focuses on people who don't fit into the norm. Like Natsuko herself can't have sex. She finds it physically painful to engage in sexual activity. And one of the other characters is just a single mother who has no interest in men. And so, the guy that she, I don't want to say is interested in, but she becomes kind of fascinated with this child of a donor who finds out that his father isn't his father, and spends his whole life not his whole life, because he finds out in his 20s, but ever since he finds it, from the point that he finds out forward, it really messes with him, and he deeply wants to find his father, and she becomes fascinated with him and meets up with him. And he also is not normal in the sense that he doesn't fit into what you would think of when you think of the phrase normal, not abnormal in like a mean or insulting way, but just in the sense that he feels like he doesn't fit in with society. He doesn't quite feel comfortable in his role, and I can't say quite more than that without spoilers, and this isn't the place for that. So suffice to say, like, the fact that there's not, like, there are normal couples in the book, and Midoriko and in the second part of the book, she's an adult and has a boyfriend, and it's a fairly normal relationship, and they get along well. And there are other couples in the background of the book. So it's not so much, rather than get upset about the fact that it doesn't represent normal people or it has some harsh things to say about normal people, I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a book about people who don't necessarily fit the quote-unquote normal mold. And to expect it to sort of cater to that crowd is to, I think, not appreciate that this is a book about people outside of that mold. This is their story. And I think if you appreciate it that way and in that context, you will hopefully come to an appreciation for a slightly different way of thinking without feeling like yourself or your personal lifestyle is attacked. So in that sense, like, as long as you can go into it with an open mindset, I would absolutely recommend this book to anybody in the hopes that it can possibly change some minds and introduce people to a new way of thinking. So pros and cons. So not quite full spoilers, but if you just want to read the book now, then definitely recommend it. Pros and cons. Pros. I love Mieko Kawakami's writing. I think that she doesn't have the magical, realist, sort of dreamlike, I say dreamlike, but surrealist, really, atmosphere of Murakami, but she captures that element of Murakami that is the feeling of isolation in a society and a structure, that feeling of being outside of the, not necessarily the norm, but basically like the norm, the everyday, the societal systems that you are expected to conform to and become a part of. So, in much the same way that Murakami's protagonists are usually middle-aged men who are alone despite being in Tokyo, here you have a middle-aged woman who is alone despite being in the center of Tokyo, and you can say the same about all the lovers in the night. Like, Mieko Kawakami is very much like you'll find in her criticisms of Murakami and the way that he writes women also a respect of Murakami and his work, to where she's critical of it, but she's also very clearly influenced by it. So you see that in her writing and in her prose. And that's not to say that it's necessarily a pro to me that her prose is like Murakami. It's a pro to me that her prose is well written, and I'm comparing it to Murakami to give you an idea of what exactly I think she captures in her prose. But it's not Murakami. It's not one-to-one. I'm not, saying like she's derivative or anything like that. I'm not trying to reduce the quality of her own prose. It's just that it's really effective at capturing that sort of isolated emotion in a similar way. So in that sense, I think it's definitely a good aspect of the book. And another pro, again, reading it on a reread, is that I think that a lot of books tend to have a habit where your main character, your protagonist, is, if not necessarily the audience surrogate, definitely by being the one through whose eyes you experience the story, is the person who becomes kind of your moral compass as well, where if somebody is against the protagonist, you're supposed to not like them. If somebody is creating obstacles for the protagonist, you're supposed to disagree with them. And it tends to be a bit more black and white, like very obvious who you're supposed to agree with, who you're not supposed to agree with. And yet this book, I think every single character has elements of them that I appreciate and elements of them I don't appreciate. So Natsuko herself is very bad at expressing herself, and she doesn't really have a lot of backbone. Early on, she clashes with one of her previous editors who says that she has no ambition, and she gets pissed off about it. But really throughout the story, it was my personal feeling that it's true, that she does have a few points in the story where she does stand up for herself and gets mad, but it's only after bottling things up for so long that they just kind of explode. She's not really fully in control of her feelings, and she kind of gets steamrolled over a few times. and it makes it, she's a bit wishy-washy. And that's not to say that she's, a total wet towel, or she exists to get pushed around by other people. She has a personality. It's just, that's a character flaw to her. And Rika, her friend, who comes into the story later, who was my least favorite character the first time I read it, because she is very independent, and she is the one who kind of gives Natsuko the power to really start looking for her own path, because she was always considering donor conception, but it's not until she meets Rika that she really starts to feel like it is something truly viable that she can do. And Rika is very much your sort of what you think of when you think of like feminist warrior, and to the point where she even goes so far as to make some comments that I have seen on incel forums, which very disturbing comments about how like men and women should live separately, and here soon we'll only need men as fertilizers, and we'll wonder how we ever got along, and it's just impossible for a man to understand a woman, blah blah blah. Which is funny, because then I guess I'll save that for later, but to keep it spoiler free, it's okay. Like, the book doesn't paint her as being completely infallible either. Like, it's okay to take issue with some of these things, and given the thing I'm just about to talk about, maybe even to wonder to just what extent she believes it. So I think there's really an element of objective thinking where you're not meant to, there's not a character that is meant to be the character who defines your perception of these characters. The characters are very much just presented as is, flaws and all. And whoever you agree with, whoever you disagree with, whatever thoughts you have, none of them are necessarily invalidated by the narrative of the story. And that, I think, is something very done well. But I think in terms of cons, there are two really big discrepancies that stand out to me. And the first is, between the novel and the short story, not all elements are one-to-one. There are a few inconsistencies, and the one that really stands out to me is Natsuko describes getting into reading as being introduced to it by her boyfriend in the novel. But in the short story, it was kind of described as a temporary issue with her bladder, where she'd spend so much time on the toilet that she would bring books with her to read on the toilet, and that was where she ended up falling in love with reading. And I kind of feel like in the novel it's changed or retconned to give her relationship with this guy who she eventually broke up with because she couldn't take satisfaction in sex, and that ended up spelling the end of the relationship. It's just those little inconsistencies where I don't feel like it really adds. It throws things off for me. Like, why did this go from being her discovering reading on her own terms, in her own way, on her own, to something that she discovered because she was with this guy, and then, kind of her bad experiences with the guy not necessarily taint her relationship with this guy, but like she thinks so much about this guy, the first person that she was in the relationship with in the novel, that his absence in the novella feel almost like just an oversight. Like, it's very obvious that the novel came after the novella. They don't necessarily agree in all the ways, and some of the characters can sound a little different. And yes, there is an 8-year time gap, but I don't know. For me, it just still feels a bit off. My second big con is that I think the ending of the story, the last 15 to 20 pages, really feel like the story is building up to something, and you have the climax, and then the falling action is so fast and so rapid, and yet it kind of feels like the story is heading one way, and then right at that falling action, it takes a bit of a shift to the left. And it's not necessarily that the shift to the left couldn't happen. It just, to me, doesn't quite feel justified or explained in a way that I'm really satisfactory with. And I will get into specific spoilers later on once I go into the full-on spoiler section. So those are kind of some of the pros and cons. I mean, it's well written. It's got good characters, well-rounded characters. And I think the research is kind of fascinating. But to give another con is on rereading it, some of these parts can feel like about as interesting as reading a textbook. And I just kind of browse through them, skip through them a little bit. They're not quite as interesting because they're just raw facts and data on rereading once you already know that. So, but in terms of cons, like I said, the novel and the novella don't quite sync up as well as I would like. And the story, it feels to me at the end, just kind of like takes a weird turn. So, going into full-on spoilers I'll get into themes, but I really want to talk about some of the stuff that I brought up earlier. So this is your last chance to go away if you want to read the book before I go into full spoilers. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so in terms of the con that I was talking about, at the end, she and Aizawa, I believe? Yeah, Aizawa. On page 404, Aizawa literally says, I was direct as possible. I told her there was someone else, someone I'd rather be with. So he's breaking up with his girlfriend because there's someone he would rather be with, and the someone is obviously Natsuko. And Natsuko at this point is devastated because she wants to talk to, or she's broken off her connection with Aizawa, and she's enjoyed talking to him so much. I mean, ultimately, he ends up donating the semen to help her have her child, and how important he has clearly become to her life. So when you have this ending, it's so clear that they're on their way to becoming a couple. But then in the end, again, in the last 10 pages, there's a comment that neither one of them wanted to be in a committed relationship. Page 422, so 8 pages from the end of the page. Neither of us was really interested in being in a committed relationship, which feels so at odds with everything that came before, especially in the that exact comment that I just mentioned. There's someone else I'd rather be with. Like, you went from a committed relationship, broke up with that person because you wanted to be with somebody else. Natsuko is miserable, and one of the biggest reasons that she's so miserable is that she's not able to meet with you and talk with you, because she's been talking about how positive that has been for her life. And then you don't want to end up together. And okay, it's not that I don't think that that's implausible so much as I need to see that. I need to see what the decision making behind that is, because I was thinking, like, okay, maybe they're not going to be in a committed relationship, but they're still going to stay good friends. And yet it goes on to describe how he's going to be staying out of her life and out of the child's life. Like, he's still going to be present at a distance in case the child wants to meet with him, but it's still very much going to be just her and the child, which I don't get it. Like, it doesn't add up. That ending does not add up in a satisfactory way for me. The relationship doesn't cap off, and maybe it's something, it could make sense if you just expanded it out a bit or described a bit more detail, had a scene where they discuss their future together rather than just cap it off like that. But it's just reeled off, which is weird because you actually have a scene that's a conversation with Rika, and you get a similar cap off there. So why not with Aizawa, who is arguably the second most important character to the novel part of the story? And going back to what I was saying with Rika in terms of the spoiler there, she does end up introducing Natsuko to a new editor, who's a male editor, by the way. So it makes me wonder, like, all their talk about how men and women can't ever get along or can't understand each other, and yet she recommends a male editor who she knows. to Natsuko, her friend. So obviously she not only knows this individual, but respects him enough to recommend him to Natsuko. So it makes me wonder just how dedicated Rika is to her shtick as, sort of this fuck men, we can't leave together femcel attitude. In that sense, that particular aspect of it is very femcel. So, and it's just kind of baffling because it makes Sengawa as a character her editor. So Natsuko's first editor told her she had no ambition, and he does sound like a shit editor, to be fair, but in terms of telling her she has no ambition, he's kind of right. She regularly spends the book, as I said at the start, wishy-washy, not able to really commit to anything. And then she meets another editor whose name is Sengawa, or it might be Senegawa. I cannot quite remember for the life of me. I apologize. But, Sengawa. Okay. And Sengawa never becomes officially her editor because she hasn't officially released a book. But they have a relationship, and it's kind of a positive relationship. And I understand Sengawa's place in the story to an extent, but it also just, it feels a bit odd. Like, Sengawa's there to basically pull Natsuko around to various literary events so that Natsuko can eventually meet Rika, and she's basically there to talk about and really show that Natsuko has potential, because all we see from Natsuko's perspective is her sort of wishy-washy inability to believe in herself. And Sengawa, in many ways, acts as her cheerleader. And then she gets cancer and dies, which makes that particular side of her character kind of feel like it's a bit of an anticlimax. I feel like it doesn't. If there was something about her learning anything from Sengawa's death, I might appreciate it more, but it just, again, doesn't quite pay off in a way that feels totally satisfying. To get into themes, I mean, it feels so stupid to talk about the themes of a book called Breasts and Eggs, because it's right there in the title, like femininity, motherhood, what a woman is allowed to do with her body, and things like that. Like, both you have Midoriko in the novella from a puberty perspective. You have Makiko in the novella from a middle-aged perspective and the sort of physical aspect. Although one thing that I do want to stress that I think is important and really stood out to me rereading is that Makiko's desire to get breast augmentation isn't something that's necessarily forced on her by men. It's something that she feels about her own body. So you can't say that she feels pressured to get breast implants because she feels like she has to meet a certain beauty standard or whatever. It's entirely sort of driven by herself and her own desire. At least that's what I took away from it. But then when you get into the main novel, you have Natsuko, and again, questions of why a single mother should be denied access to fertility treatment while couples are allowed to, lesbian couples, gay couples, and so on and so forth. And so rather than necessarily touching on the obvious themes of the novel, I want to kind of really focus, I guess, on two sort of smaller themes, or not necessarily smaller in one case, but maybe things that aren't as blatantly obvious from the title. So the first aspect is poverty, which is really a huge sub-theme throughout the story. And I'm pretty sure I remember reading that Mieko Kawakami herself grew up in Danchi, in a very poor area. So it probably all comes from a very genuine place. And Natsuko and her sister, like when I say they're poor, I'm talking like working jobs in a middle school, because they're they had a rough childhood with their dad. Their dad was a deadbeat, did nothing. They ended up having to leave their home in the middle of the night because debt collectors were hounding them. They moved back in with their grandmother. Then the grandmother died. Then the mother died. And it was just Natsuko and her sister. And she was working as young as middle school, faking her age to get a job. So that sort of poverty has really come to embody so many of Natsuko's thoughts and her feelings and the way that she views the world, to the point where even when she has money, she just kind of puts it all in the bank. She doesn't consider moving to a bigger house. She only ends up moving apartments when her old apartment gets basically demolished, and she doesn't splurge or buy luxuries or anything really. She just continues living her life because those things aren't necessarily important to her. The sort of capitalist drive that underpins a lot of other things are so secondary, because what the poverty aspect of the novel really drives is how community ends up being what gets people through tough times. Whether it's the community between Natsuko and her sister when they were younger and her sister looked out for her, whether it's the community that they have as when Midoriko grows up in the novel, and it's kind of her sister Midoriko and Makiko together, and that sort of community, or with Rika or Sengawa, they form kind of a community there, or with Aizawa, and he talks about sort of his relationship with his family and how he ends up finding a place in this group for donor children, or his girlfriend, whose name I am drawing a blank on right now. I know it starts with a U. Yuriko. It's another ko. Yuriko. There's a Yuriko, a Midoriko, a Makiko, and a Natsuko. So many children in this book. Anyway, Yuriko, who kind of isn't able to find a community, not really find a community, but isn't really able to integrate into a community given her own personal circumstances. And her background is tragic, and I don't want to act a psychologist here, but I think her sort of inability to join and let herself be vulnerable, which is understandable given her past, is really shown to kind of inhibit her. So, it's not poverty in the sense of, sending a message about capitalism or the abuse of the weak or whatever. It's not interested in that sort of political ideology, that sort of ambiguous, I said ideology, but that, ideological stance. It's about just how to fucking survive it. And its answer to that is basically community and the people that and how people work together to survive through hard times. So that's a very big sub-theme to this book. And the second thing that I really want to talk about is how much I appreciate the aspect that the book gives to donor children and their experiences. Because it's so easy when you kind of get caught up in these conversations about, a woman's right to... I don't want to say abortion, because abortion is it has some crossovers in the sense of the conversations about a woman's body, but with the donor, obviously the idea is to end up producing a baby, and so in this sense, the future child's rights and thoughts do play a big role in the sort of consideration, and there is an ethical question there that needs to be asked. And I appreciate this aspect of the book that really takes the time to go into that ethical question and explore it from two different views. Because obviously it's easy to say, you'll never know until the baby is born, and you can't exactly ask a non-existent being. so I guess it's okay. But you to contrast it against two people who, you have Aizawa, who ultimately is glad he is born and happy with his not necessarily happy with his situation, like he's lost, but ultimately he comes to terms with the fact that his foster family, he was really happy with them, especially happy with his dad, which again, in terms of that non-biased thing, Aizawa is a good, by good I mean a male character who isn't a selfish asshole. There's Aizawa, and his father is a good guy, a really good guy, had a really positive influence on his life. And his mother, meanwhile, seems to be kind of a bit more not so great. And I bring that up because most of the men in the book aren't very great. But again, I don't think it's a commentary on all men. I think it's just happens to be the situation that a lot of these women find themselves in. So, at the end of the day, finding out that he's a donor, or that his father isn't his father, is a huge shock to him, and it knocks his life off course for several years. But he is still able to come to terms with that in his own way, and it underscores that it is a challenge. And then you have Yuriko, who doesn't really give a shit about who her parents are or aren't, because in her own way, she I think she even says she isn't really happy with, or at least it's implied that she isn't happy that she was born. Her whole thing is about how even just the idea of bringing a baby into the world normally is to invite it into pain and suffering. And the book mentions that it's a very she's childlike, and it mentions the idea as being childlike, and I agree with it. It is a sort of childlike idea and way of looking at things, but it's still valid because it's still ultimately an adult and a human being who feels that way. And without presenting that side of the story, you're missing something. And so this ties back into my sort of huge respect for the number of different sides that this book tries to take into account, to the point where, not to take something feminist and make it about men, but it just made me consider, have there ever been any men who have wanted to raise a child as a single man without getting into a relationship or something like that? And like I said, it's not about trying to take something that is very feminist and female-centric and make it about men. It's just got me considering so many different angles that just popped into my mind. And maybe it's the fact that the book is so good at capturing a lot of those nuances that it makes the sudden left turn at the end feel so much more abrupt. Because it's not that I can't see Aizawa and Natsuko not deciding to become a couple. It's just that it's not the decisions leading up to that. It doesn't feel like that was their trajectory. I mean, very clearly that wasn't their trajectory when Aizawa is in a committed relationship with Yuriko, breaks up with Yuriko because he would rather be with someone else, and then isn't with that person. Like, that's insane. And especially given, like I said, how much Natsuko was clearly enjoyed being around him, it feels like they should have at least had a friendship. So, and I was trying to think of it this time, reading it, maybe not being in a committed relationship means that they could still be in a close friendship. But then they mention him keeping distant while she raises the child, so that seems out of the question. I don't know. It's just all very up in the air. And coupled with Midoriko talking about the weasels, which just kind of gets resolved, it just the whole ending just kind of feels like it's rushed and doesn't tie up everything as well as it could. But I don't know what the circumstances are behind it. So I'm glad I came back to this book and gave it another shot. I came away with a much more nuanced appreciation for it this time. On the whole, I enjoyed it, although it really ties back into that idea that beginnings and endings are the most important thing. because if you don't have a strong beginning, then you're not obviously going to lose a lot of readers, and if you don't have a strong ending, then that's what people are going to be left with. And it's such a shame, because up until the last literally 10 pages, I was really on board and enjoying this, and then those last 10 pages hit, and I'm definitely, I go from like, yeah, I can see myself returning to this book several times, and I still can, but oh man, that just leaves it on such a bad taste, which is unfortunate. So I haven't decided what I'm going to read next. I've got a few things in the mix. It depends on whether or not I want to stick with Japanese fiction or take a break. So but this, if you take anything away from this review, it's that if you really don't like something, you read something, you watched something, and you really didn't like it, but you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, or you're not entirely sure, like, go back and interrogate that feeling. Try to figure out why you didn't like it, and maybe give it a second chance, because, for me, like I said, I was definitely letting outside circumstances influence my reading of the book, and the book is better than that, and I think it deserves better than that. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the case with you. There are things that I didn't enjoy that I still will not revisit, because life's too damn short. But who knows? You might go back to something that you thought you didn't like, find out that a lot of what you thought you had read into it isn't necessarily there, or that you yourself approach things differently now and are able to maybe appreciate some of the author's or character's perspectives. So, yeah, just give it a try. You never know what you're going to end up finding. And until then, take care.